Good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I hope you are all fine, you are all well. In today's lesson, we're going on our Scala lessons. So far, I have lectured 3 Scala lessons, and this afternoon, we're going on with lesson 4. And by the way, I'd like to give some short information about this course. By means of a utility, by means of an IDE, that's to say ECLIPSE IDE, I'm lecturing you, I'm presenting you Scala codes, and I run these Scala codes by paraphrasing its content. The output, the result will be shown on the same screen. I use ECLIPSE IDE, as I said. So far so good, and for many other languages I prefer ECLIPSE IDE development environment. And without wasting any time, I'd like to start up our lesson, today's lesson. Okay, for lesson 4 we're going on with code snippet 28. With this code snippet, I go on giving information about Scala functions. As you remember, in order to use a function, you have to describe it by giving a name to it, and after you define this function, you enter your code to be executed during the recall of this function, and after that it may contain a return value, and how to use this Scala function within our Scala main function. So just there are a few ways for that. For example, we prefer to use a print method, and as a parameter of for print method, as a content, we can use this function. That's to say, we can recall add integers function. In this case, I describe here a function to sum up 2 integers, 2 parameters. These 2 parameters are parameter A and B, so both of them are integer, so as to be integer, and the result will be integer. This notation just is for Scala syntax. This integer will be, of course, sum equals to A plus B. This is our function method, and as a return value, I'd like to return this sum value. Just I mentioned to forget this. We define a sum value and we initialize it to 0. Of course, it is also an integer. And how to use this function so as to make a addition. I here get written paraphrasing here, returned value, such as within quotation marks. Okay, and this is the concatenation sign. In fact, it's not a mathematical addition sign. I simply recall its name, function's name, with 2 parameters. Our parameters only 2. 5 stands for A and 7 stands for B. So let's run this Scala snippet. Okay, 5 plus 7 equals to 12. So this line is printed. Okay, returned value equals to 12. I think there is nothing to be ununderstood, I think. Okay, this is another one, call by name. Just we can call functions by their name, by its name. I here define 2 functions. One of it time function. It's not gonna take any argument. So within brackets, I define this function. This function will have two methods, in fact. One method is print line, and the other method I recall system.nanotime, and I define another function here, a delayed function. T is going to be long integer, and there is also two methods here, printing methods, in delay method and parameter plus t. So how to recall all this stuff? In our main function block, I simply write delayed function, or other saying, I recall delayed function with time function without mentioning any argument. Okay, just after we recall, we run this snippet. Okay, at first this line is printed in delayed method. Okay, after that we'll get getting time in nanoseconds. We'll recall this line, getting time in nanoseconds. So this phrase will be written, and after that it's gonna calculate the instances past elapsed so far. So it's a integer like this. This is the figure that's calculated since a certain time that's accepted as a starting time. It's about 1971. That must be over those years. Okay, how about the next one? In this example, I define a print strings function with arguments. Of course, arguments will be a string this way. I here establish a for loop here, and by means of for loop, I would like to print out this phrase, the argument value plus the index I plus and another argument. So just by mentioning its name, we'd like to use these arguments, hello, Scala, Python, and by means of this loop, index I will be increased one by one, and it's gonna repeat it 3 times. And let me run this one and see, to show you. Okay, this is the indexes, argument value, index 0, 1, 2, and hello, Scala, Python will be printed out in 3 separate lines. How about snippet 31st? In this case, functions can be called with default parameter values, or other saying, without mentioning any parameter. It's possible, it is allowed to call like this. And our function is add_int once again. Okay, I here define initialization values for A and B arguments, and the remaining part is the same. Okay, and sum is returned as a value, return value. When we recall this within a method, print method, okay, like this, without mentioning, we do not mention any arguments. So this thing accepts that the initial arguments will be accepted as a default value. So the result will be the same as it is expected. Okay, 12 is written. And how about the other one? Okay, here I'd like to give a example for nested functions. Nested functions can be defined within one block, so as to include the other one inside the block. And I preferred a factorial function here. So I'd like to calculate the factorial n or factorial x. And within this block, in a nested manner, I define another factorial here, fact, and letter I will be integer and will be a variable, and accumulator will be another variable, so as to be integer in fact, and the result will be integer. And this is the control mechanism, you guys. As long as I less than or equal to 1, so it's gonna do this. Otherwise or else act I minus act fact I minus 1 comma I multiplied by accumulator. So this is one block. Okay, within this block, or just like this. And how about the outermost function? Fact I comma 1 is called once again. So how to use this structure? I simply give its name with parameters, so as to be calculated as factorial. And as a definition, factorial 0 is 1. Also factorial 1 is also 1. How about the factorial 2, 3, and 5? When we run this one, one, 1, 2, 6, and 5. This stands for the factorial of 5, in fact. Structure is very easy. We recall a method, print line method, for each line, and within this print method I recall factorial function. Our factorial function here defined so as to give factorial of I. And within this frame there is another fact calculation. Multiplication in fact is performed here, I times accumulator. Accumulator also integer. And this is the control mechanism, so as to be greater than 1. That means 2, 3, 4, 5, and goes on like this. Partially applied functions. So this is another example for function recalling. I here import data, import Java utility module, and here I define log method here, log function, so as to include date, and it's gonna give message string, and it's gonna print out date plus this and message. So before that I'd like to give these details. Value date, this is my variable definition. It's gonna be a val type. New date, this is an object, and log, I recall the log method here. It's gonna take two parameters, date and message first parameters, argument as argument, and thread.sleep. This just stands for a pause. 1000 means it's gonna give a full 1 second so as to make a pause, and after that log date comma message 2, and it's gonna break once again, it's gonna pause once again, and this time that's gonna print out message 3. So just we expect 3 lines will be printed so as to be printed by pauses, by a delay, 1 second of delay. So let's make it run and see. Okay, like this. As I said, 3 messages are printed, and at the beginning I give the details of date information, and I put dashes here, and after that by means of this concatenation operator I get it printed, this message. Okay, how about next one? Okay, functions with named arguments. Here I define a print int integer function. This print int definition in function will have 2 methods, this method and that method, another method. So by recalling this print int function, so just I'd like to get it printed with assumed values. That means I recall this function not as a whole manner, just by giving some initial values for that. Let me print it, this one also, get it printed. Okay, value of A and value of B 5, 7. The important thing here is that by giving its name separately, it's gonna be accepted what you chose instead of the line it's described here. Okay, this is a recursion example. Of course, known example for recursion is factorial. I here define a factorial function. Okay, and will be big int, this type for that, and big int result will be calculated like this. This stands for just to filter the cases that might be 0 or 1, because in definition, as a definition, factorial of 0 equals to 1 and factorial of 1 equals to 1. And by eliminating this case, we go on our calculation for factorial, and n is the upper limit, and by decreasing n so as to down to 2, it's going to be multiplied by the previous value. So I have to recall this factorial function by mentioning its name. So this is the paraphrasing titling sections, and factorial I have to mention that this is gonna print out factorials 1 to 9. Okay, as you see, factorials of numbers up to 9 is going to be printed out as it is displayed. How about this one? Okay, high order functions. Just I give an example. Okay, once again. Okay, this is much better. I define apply and I define layout functions here, and at first f function is going to be a string, and a will be a string also, and how to call this? First I recall apply by accepting layout function as a argument. So this is somehow in nested structure, in a nested structure. So just mentioning a parameter for that, that means we're going to use this parameter. The code will be performed in accordance with the order that's recalled from left to right. Okay, just as you can see, it is written in parentheses, okay, and it's converted into string. In fact, this is not a number 10. This is 1 and 0 characters, so as to include, so as to consist of a string. In fact, what's the next example for today? Here, Scala anonym functions, another example. Okay, I define string categories here, so as to sum string first and string second to be a whole string, a single string. Okay, and after that I would like to write a paraphrasing here, and I recall strcat function with parameters str first and str2 second. I here defined str first and str second as string, so as to be hello and Scala. And when we run this function, we will see that after we assign these values for our string variables, this method will be recalled, okay, and when we come here, strcat function is recalled, okay, like this. So these strings will be concatenated, and after that it's gonna be printed out. Okay, hello, Scala is printed out on the screen as it is expected. Okay, friends, we have completed lesson for today. So far we have completed almost a third of our course program. In the following weeks we will have Scala 5 and Scala 6, and it's gonna reach up to lesson 10, I think. I know it's going more and more harder and harder. I try to paraphrase all bits and pieces, and that's all what I think for the time being. Thanks for your time, for sparing me, watching me, and bye bye. Hoşça kalın.